Alex Bruschi, welcome to the Entrepreneur Next Door. Uh, I've had a lot of people tell me that I got to have you. I'm glad you said yes. Thank you. So we'll start. So first of all, you're a master podcaster and you have training courses on how to podcast. So I think I shared with you on LinkedIn that I bought a brand new Depend diaper. I'm wearing it as we speak in case I mess up. Um, but go for it. Please introduce yourself.
Well, Zev, first off, thanks for having me. I really love the concept of the show, and huge thank you to Ashley for getting us introduced. Love all of this. Quick introduction about myself. I'm currently an AE at Salesforce. I host my own podcast called Sales Stories in Real Life. Folks can check that out on their favorite streaming platforms. And as you alluded to, I actually just launched a consulting project to help people start their own podcasts. So, funny enough, real quick backstory on that. 3 most common DMs I get on LinkedIn is number 1, just spam. Number 2, people asking for tips on how to get hired at Salesforce. And 3, people wanting to know how to start their own podcast. And that just very kind of naturally led me down this path. I don't know that I'd call myself a master podcaster, but what I would say is I can help somebody to post their first 10 episodes, right? The most difficult episodes there are to publish. Just get out there, get started, make it something tangible. And as I'm sure you've seen with your podcast as well, just magic happens from there.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you've seen my stuff, I go all over the place and kind of react to what my guests say, even though I studied you for a couple of hours. I prepare. I have some good questions, but you say something and then my brain fires up and off I go. So we're talking podcasting, and my story is it was maybe I don't know 8 years ago. A friend of mine ran an event in New York City. By the way, I'm mad at you because you deserted me. You escaped the island and went to California. We'll talk about that later. So a friend of mine ran this event in the city, and it was called uh, something like Guy Raz's podcast of how I built it. It was like a millionaire story. He invited a bunch of millionaires, and there was different functions, and then he put 4 of them on the stage, and he looked at me and he said, "Hey, do you want to interview them?" And I mean, didn't know what I was going to do, and I said, I first say yes, then I deal with the consequences. That's sort of been my story. And I got on the stage and I started talking to them. But I wasn't scared. They're millionaires. I wasn't. Just talk to them like you and I are talking. We just literally just met, right? And I got off the stage and people asked me, which network do you work for? Can I have your card? And I said, why? I said, this was great. You asked them some really revealing, intimate questions. You weren't afraid. So the story is, I kind of found that I like doing it. And the first version of my podcast was way before everybody and the cousin 3 times removed got into it during COVID. Was 6 years ago, and I called it Unfamous Entrepreneurs because my
Love that.
niche. So the point of the podcast, which is bringing me to you, if you're going to podcast, just like a good marketer, just like a good salesperson, which we'll talk about, you want to pick a lane, pick a niche. You can't be everything to everyone. And so my thing was, I want to bring regular people who are business owners, who are entrepreneurs, just tell their stories. Maybe they're not Mark Cuban and Mr. Wonderful or Elon or anybody else. They're just people. So then I got busy and I stopped. Then I came back and then I called it the Entrepreneur Next Door, which is the concept is these are non-celebrities. There might be a few people that I might ask to be my guest who are quote unquote celebrities. Most of them say no because I don't have 100,000 followers, which is fine. But at the end of the day, your podcast, which is about sales stories, right, in real life, I watch a whole bunch of them, and I thought it was great. So, what? Again, we're going backwards, but what got you into podcasting?
So great lead in, first off. And let me, I guess, even back up for a bit, because even before there was a podcast, I was trying to break into tech sales. So I have never held a full-time job other than sales, right? So I've been in sales for close to 10 years by the time I decided, hey, I should really take this to tech, right? This was 2020, 2021. Things were running up rapidly. And I was in a position where I was doing really good, but not great. So it was kind of one of those like hard to leave situations. Finally got the courage to leave and ended up joining a tech startup and getting laid off. Ended up joining another tech startup and ended up getting laid off as well. So I really quickly realized that I needed to make a name for myself in this space if I wanted to succeed just beyond the piece of paper of my resume, right? Piece of paper of my resume would say this person has no tech sales experience. They have 2 recent short stints, right? Why should we take a chance on this guy? So I really quickly realized like, hey, I got to do something to get my name out there, right? And so I'd always seen people podcast. Shout out to Nick Sigelski and Armand Farouk. I met them just as they were starting their podcast, which has now become a smashing success, 30 Minutes to President's Club. And I just always had that itch in the back of my mind of like, I could really do this, you know, like, I don't know how, but I know that I could do this and I know that I could do this successfully. And funny enough, one of the first things that got me inspired outside of just making myself stand out was like, it was another content waterfall to create, you know, it was like, well, you know, I'm just kind of like getting into like the whole LinkedIn posting, like this will give me a post a week, right? Like 1 post a week to promote an episode. So like just those little things that kind of get you started. And going back to your question, what actually got me started is I was living in San Diego at the time. I had just moved to LA. My rent, you know, went up like $500-600 a month, something kind of crazy. We had a really good deal at our old place. And I was like, man, like I can also really like use some kind of project to work on, you know, to make a few extra bucks. And so my wife and I were walking through a farmer's market, the Brentwood Farmer's Market for folks who know LA. And I walked past 2 bakery stands. And let's just say both of the pastries at both of the bakery stands were exactly the same. I walk up to the first one and the person's like, hey, what can I help you with? And right away I'm like, no, I'm good, right? Like you just get in your defensive mode. And I walk up to the second stand. And I'm standing in front of the second stand, and for like a full 2 to 3 minutes, which doesn't sound like much, but is like an eternity when you're standing in front of someone, just silent. I'm eyeing down all the pastries, you know, there's like leaving me to my own. And then eventually he says something that like blew my mind. He goes, did you find anything you like yet? Did you find anything you like yet? And it just like hit me all in that moment. It was like, I just walked past 2 people that were selling something identical. And one place I'm walking away with a bunch of purchased items and I'm excited for it. And the other one, I'm kind of walking away in disgust. You know, like there needs to be something that we can take from these experiences as sellers, right? Like we're acutely aware when we're being sold to, why is everything sales podcast related just talking about the perspective of a seller? Like, why are we not even considering the perspective of a buyer and why people buy, why they don't buy, what pushes them to see a demo? And so that's where the idea for the concept of the show really took off, and the rest is history.
Amazing. And the guy who, I don't know if he owned the bakery or not, brilliant.
Who knows?
Right? Really. 2
Great question.
Side by side, you stand there and one guy engages you, right? And that's it. It's the so what, and we'll talk sales because I've done enough of it and don't like it as much as everybody else that's doing sales. Maybe you love it, but it's really about we're human beings. That's what everybody forgets. Forget the titles. We're just human beings, and what drives us is an emotional connection. And the sooner you can get to that emotional connection, the easier it is the barriers fall away, and then you feel relaxed, and then you can talk to somebody, right? Which I'm just going to throw numbers out, but you can correct me because that's your area, right? I would say 90% of salespeople fail in that respect. They skip over the intimate connection to get to what it is they want you to hear or sell. Even if they ask a couple of opening questions, which they were taught to do, their mindset is in the wrong place. No, just like you said.
Right.
Let's talk about the buyer. All right, so that was beautiful. Now I'm going to go back to my regular schedule programming when the question that I want to ask you.
Let's do it.
So you're a Long Island boy, where I'm from, not from, but I'm in Long Island.
Oh, no
You're,
kidding.
I think you are in New Hyde Park. I'm in Woodbury, Sayas. It doesn't matter. Same thing. Um, you're 16. You're in Long Island. I bump into you. I don't know, probably playing sports somewhere, and they say, "Alex, what do you want to be when you grow up?" And the answer is,
The answer at that time was I thought I wanted to be a school teacher. Ironically enough, quickly into college, I realized that that wasn't a feasibility and that wasn't really me. But yeah, gosh, thinking back to 16-year-old me and also fellow Long Islander, welcome. I hear it's like really beautiful right now. My parents are just over, ironically enough. But yeah, at the time, believe it or not, I wanted to be a school teacher. And at that time, if you wanted a job to be a school teacher, maybe I'm aging myself here, you had to go into math and science. If not, there was no teacher jobs available. So real quickly, I realized that math and science were not my forte.
but you know what? I so see you as a teacher, though. You have it. I can see it. I mean, it's like it's a natural thing. You'd be up there, and the kids would love you. What's wrong with I don't know. You could be an art teacher, but if you can't do art, it might not be a thing. It's fine. Okay, so I wrote a note here because you're Long Island, so I know the university system on Long Island, and you went to Farmingdale State University, which is a state school, and I wrote a note. All great people go to state colleges because everybody goes through, we all go through the high school years, and the social pressure starts with where you go in school, and everybody starts throwing these big fancy names to impress each other, particularly Long Island. It's like everything's competitive. And the brave ones say, we have some great state school, right? Why not just go? It's okay. It's not a black dot next to your name if you didn't go to Columbia and Harvard and whatever. So you went to Farmingdale State College, but then Barcelona. How'd you?
Yeah. So I was fortunate enough to get to do a study abroad program the semester before I graduated, and that like really changed my life tenfold. But to your point, yeah, went to Farmingdale. I actually went to a school before Farmingdale. I actually went to Marist. I was there for 3 semesters. And that was where I very quickly realized that math and science, like I mentioned, weren't my thing. And so I ended up, rather than doing like a reshift while being away at school, I actually came home and ended up working part-time while I was getting my degree. So I went to work where my dad was working at the time, and I would do 2 days a week of heavy class. Like I would do like pretty much all my classes on 2 days. And then the other 2 days of the week, I would take like one class or something, like at the end of the day. So like I would work the whole day, take like a 3 p.m. class and, then go home. So it was very much like a work study program. And I got to kind of build myself back up and get work experience and, do much better at school than I was previously, which led me to the opportunity to study abroad in Barcelona. And at the time, my perspective was like, I'm a kid from New York, right? And then after being in the classroom with kids from Spain, kids from Italy, kids from France, kids from the Philippines, right? Like people from everywhere were like all in the same classroom learning together. It was just such a crazy mindset shift to being a kid from New York to a citizen of the earth. And I just think that mindset has just changed my life ever since.
Yeah, I did the round trip from the other side. I grew up in Israel and came here to go to school. Went to Purchase, which is a college. Was accepted everywhere because Israeli school system's highly rated. I got into Berkeley, I got into NYU, Columbia. I couldn't pay for it, but I chose Purchase because it was a small school and I wanted a small, intimate environment. But the shocking thing for me is coming to living on campus and meeting mostly Americans. We had a pretty good international students group, but not big. How their universe was so pigeonholed into, well, this is America. Whatever happens here happens in the rest of the world, and it really isn't. And I think that's true even today, even though Americans learn to travel, we still don't get it. There's a completely different universe across the water with
Yeah.
perspectives about every aspect of life, and we can learn from it. Doesn't mean it's better or worse. It's just we can learn from it. So you said before you spent pretty much your entire career in sales, and you work for insurance, a solar company, real estate education, and you wind up as Salesforce as an account executive. Um, was did you fall into sales because you needed a job, or did something attract you into it?
So definitely fell into sales. It definitely was not a premeditated decision. So ironically enough, speaking of Farmingdale, for those that are familiar, it's right down the street from Melville, which is like big, business hub on Long Island, you could say. And at the time, I had just finished my semester studying abroad, which was like the summer semester. So basically, I was getting back from study. Excuse me. I was getting back from study abroad, and it was like June, and then classes were going to start in end of August or end of or beginning of September. So it was like a 2-3 month period there, where like you're on summer break. And I got back from Spain with this whole new mindset of just like, again, being a citizen of the world, and like my whole worldview is expanded. And I kind of quickly realized, like, I don't have an internship and I'm graduating next semester. Like, I got to get on it. So as soon as I got back, I asked my school for available internship opportunities. There was an internship opportunity that was right up the road from Farmingdale. It was literally, I want to say, a mile or a mile and a half up the road, right by the highway exit that I was taking, right? It was like just very kind of meant to be. I went and had an interview with them, got along with the owner really well, got along with, the managers really well. And they were like, oh yeah, you can do really well here. It's like, great. I had no idea what we did. I had no clue what we did. In fact, for the first 2 months, I was just kind of like taking up space is what I would say, and just kind of blending in. Like I was an unpaid intern, like I was just doing what I could to fit in. And then eventually after like, again, that second month or so, I kind of went into the boss's office and said like, hey, I want to figure out a way to get compensated. Like, how could I get compensated? And he just like threw me this old recycled lead list and was like, call these people and make meetings. And I was like, okay, I didn't know any better. And I ended up making 5 meetings that night, which like I had no clue if that was good, if that was bad. I was just calling people and making meetings. I didn't even know what we were making. I didn't even know what I was making meetings for. I was so just like green.
What was you don't have to, obviously don't have to mention their name, but what was the product? Was that insurance?
Oh, one sec. I'm getting there.
Okay.
So I'm booking these meetings, and I go into the boss's office at the end of the day, and I'm like, hey, I made 5 meetings. Like, here's the dates and the times. And he like almost fell out of his chair, and I didn't know whether it was good or bad. That's how clueless I was. That's how like fell into sales it was. Is like I wasn't even know that I was doing this fantastic meeting booking. And so really quickly accelerated from there. And I kind of realized that I had this knack to talk with people, and people say the gift of gab or whatever. But to your question, turned out we were life insurance. So after about 2 months or so, I realized what it was that I was doing and what we were selling. And by the time I was ready to graduate, I basically already had a job there. By the time I was graduating my last semester, I didn't have many credits remaining. I think only like 12 credits remaining. So it was like 4 classes, or something along those lines. So I was just doing pretty much half time at work, half time at the internship, at school per week. And by the time I graduated, like literally the next day, I was working full time in insurance sales.
I mean, I would tip my hat to you because I had a few friends who were in insurance sales, and one of them was my college roommate actually. One of
Tough
them
business.
he was an opera singer, an amazing voice, but like many musicians, couldn't make a living doing it. And then a couple years after he graduated college, he starts calling me and says, let me come see you. And he said, love to see you. What do I know, right? He shows up and he starts selling me these insurance policies. And I said, what? I thought you were I thought you were an opera. No, I couldn't do that. So I have respect for them because it is a tough sale, and you got to make a lot of calls to do that. So you do this stint, and then you go into, was the second one solar? kind of?
So yeah. So essentially, what happened is I very quickly realized that Fridays were, I don't want to say a wasted day, but there wasn't really much done getting on Friday. Much stuff getting done on Fridays. Most people didn't want to meet on Fridays. Like at this time, this was 2013, 2014 or so. So like there was no Zoom culture, right? Like if you're meeting somebody, you drive to their house and you meet them. That means you're likely meeting them after work, right? Because people aren't home at 12 in the afternoon when they have full-time jobs. So this was like meeting people at like 6, 7 p.m. at their home, right? Leaving at 8, 8:30, getting home at 9, right? And this is my first working experience. So I was really, really cutting my teeth and getting out there. And like you said, tough business, especially at that time when the world wasn't so mobile like this and you could just hop on a Zoom with someone rather than having to do everything in person. I really wanted to increase my earning potential with the time that I had available. And not only was Friday not really a productive day, because most of the times if you make a meeting for, say, the next week, most of the time it ends up getting canceled. Most people don't want to sit down that day. And that's typically the day that, you go out to lunch, right? And maybe you go out to lunch for a little bit longer than usual. And it's like, okay, like we can make some more value of the time here. And so I had seen this ad about people selling solar door to door. At this point in time, New York was completely subsidizing solar. So we were like knocking on people's door and basically saying like, hey, there's this pool of money and you can get solar on your roof for free. And, you can expect X amount of dollars off of your electric bill every single month. And so that's what I would do is on Fridays, I would sell solar door to door, make meetings. Again, I was probably even more successful knocking on doors than over the phone. Just like, so a real quick synopsis is we were taught to like knock on people's door and give them the spiel. It's Alex from, Sun Power, blah, blah, blah. I'm here to, and I would just walk up to people because this was at a time when there was like a lot of people selling solar. So I would just like knock on people's doors and just ask them like, why haven't you considered it yet? Like this is crazy. Like they're paying for it, like why wouldn't you do this? And it just like really kind of cut through the noise, and it just like cut out the BS and people would just like tell me what the thing that was holding them back was. I had a quick opportunity to kind of overcome that. And in one day a week, so I was doing Fridays as well, which wasn't really a strong day per week. I was putting up like as much meetings as people that were working full time there. And it would be like, if I had a meeting that like sold a deal or something, it was like $500, which was like at the time, like incredible. Like I couldn't believe it. There was one day, I think I sold 4 meetings, that ended up becoming deals. And it was like, I made $2,000 in a day. It was like, at the time, I couldn't believe it. So I was doing the insurance sales while I was doing solar sales. At the time, my girlfriend and I were living in Long Island City, for those that are familiar with the city. And then as you'll see shortly thereafter, we decided to move to San Diego and just wanted something different.
So you're doing B2C kind of, right? Insurance,
Yeah.
solar is sort of B2C.
Yeah.
But then at some point you migrate to B2B. Did you get any formal sales training at any point in your career, or this is like live and learn, right? You figure it out.
At the start, it was very much live and learn. I had a couple of companies that I worked at. I would say in Salesforce being the biggest one. My current company is very focused on training and development for our reps. Outside of that, it was sink or swim, to your point. Like it was like there wasn't a choice. It was like you either learned it or you failed. So I was like, okay, I guess I'm learning. And it was really valuable lessons where like I think doing is more impactful than learning, right? Like learn by doing, don't like learn by like examples or like reading or whatever the case may be. Like if you want to get better at cold calling, make cold calls. There's no better way, right? There's no better way to improve at selling than going out and selling. So I was fortunately able to learn that lesson very, very quickly.
It's interesting because, cold calling is a completely different topic. I spoke to Ashley about it in my podcast. Something that, most of us don't like, hate, as a matter of fact, but some industries still do it, right? Financials, insurance, they still do. And I know someone in my BNI group who said he started his career making 300 to 400 cold calls a day, and people sitting on him, making sure the calls were made. So I don't know. I've done mostly B2B my entire career. And I think in listening to you, I think the sales culture has changed uh, pretty dramatically after the internet because knowledge is power. So the thing that salespeople always relied on was, let me tell you about my product. And since no other
Yeah.
place to check it, you either trust them or not, right? Um, but I think the culture changed where sales was, okay, you want to do sales. We know that, I don't know, 80% are going to lose. So they're going to either self-select out or just get rid. It was kind of like, let's, until when we find a couple good ones, they'll stick around and make money. And then you kind of cycle them. I think insurance is pretty much like this, right? You want a career in insurance, come in, call your family and friends. You're probably not going to make as much money, but they got new policies. At the end, they win,
Right.
right? Um, it's it's really not the same anymore. And when you go through, if people will listen to uh, sales stories in real life, which is kind of your program, your podcast, and you listen to everybody's experiences, um, it is a different world. It's a different world because it forces anyone who's in sales, if they're smart, right? Because the bandwidth for I'm going to listen. I'm willing to listen to what you have to say. To get out of my face, I'm not interested. It's very short, right? Because we have options we don't need, right? So that brings me to one of my most disliked word that you use a lot on your show, which is gurus, right? So you have guests to talk about who are sales. I don't want to call them experts either. They're sales specialists, people with a lot of experience, and say, oh, this is the gurus are going to get pissed off, right? So why don't we define what a guru is in sales, Alex? What when we say guru in sales, what comes to your mind? And we'll put guru in quotes, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say that's a tough one because I'm not the biggest believer of like guru and like influencer. Like I wouldn't even want anyone to call me an influencer. You know, like I mean honestly, like my preferred is like I would be preferred to be known as like someone well connected and trusted, you know, and a lot of people know me. Like I don't buy into like the kind of like modern influencer culture too much. But to answer your question directly, I think what the definition of guru has become is somebody who has credibility on a certain topic or niche knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, and those people make it their goal to be like one of the premier knowledge sources of that particular topic or that particular niche. That's my thought of it.
Yeah, I mean the word guru to me. If you told me that 25 years ago, if you said guru, I immediately think Indian culture, right? I'm not thinking somebody who's a influencer.
Yeah, yeah.
But to me, and I'm with you. I mean, I always dislike these kind of self-anointed titles that a lot of people, shroud themselves with. The other one that's my favorite is expert, right? Um, since I'm older than you, I'll tell you how we used to define an expert, and you'll get a kick out of it. So the definition of expert when I was growing up in business was anyone who's 50 miles away from home. Right? So when you think about it and
Well,
you let it sink, you're saying, "Oh yeah, nobody knows me. I'm going to call myself an expert," and people tend to believe you. Today, real easy to become an expert. All you need is a laptop, a Wi-Fi connection, a website, and you can put whatever you want on it and call yourself an expert and a guru. And I wrote some of the others that I don't like evangelist and architect of change. The point is, we don't need this. If you're truly someone with credibility and accomplishments, that right, that learned by doing, then you're somebody that I would want to learn from. That's for me is the person that I'm thinking about, right? Not someone that's necessarily a celebrity. Um, so let's talk a little bit about the evolution of sales. So I wrote down a whole bunch of titles from the early days to maybe today. We started with salesmen because they were mostly men back then. Sales rep, business development manager, business development representative, account manager, sales consultant, inside sales representative, there are so many different titles around, right? And I think the progression of those titles sort of represents what has happened to sales from the early days, right? So you work for Salesforce, and I think your title is AE, which is account executive. Um, I always found that to be a little confusing. It's like, what's an account executive? Why can it be account manager? Why can it be customer relationship? Whatever. Um, so, what do you think about the role of sales today? Because to me, and maybe you'll be mad at me, but I kind of felt I'm a marketing guy primarily who adopted sales because when I was doing marketing 30 years ago, we were considered the expense on the expense side of the company, right? We were always creating campaigns, spending money. And so when things went bad or south, the first people to get tossed out were the marketing guys. And when I realized that early in my career as a new immigrant to the US, I said, okay, I need to grab sales for job security. So they won't fire salespeople who are, what they're doing. So there's a progression of what sales used to be to what it is today, particularly in business to business. And you talk about this in your podcast, right? Have the buyer perspective. So unpack that a little bit in terms of for people my listeners are startup founders, small business owners, entrepreneurs, lots
Yep.
of growth marketers. And I think the common thread among everyone is that maybe they realize mentally they need to do sales, but nobody likes to do it. So here's a way. I think you open the door to a mindset that I think makes it much easier to sell than the old one.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there. So I would say to start, I look at marketing as selling at scale. Like scale largely is a one-to-one thing, and marketing is like a team to the world thing, right? So like marketers, in my opinion, definitely sell in a different way, in a very different way, in fact. But the goal is still the same, right? We're all having the same goal of revenue. And it starts with marketing and then it comes down the funnel into sales. So I would start with that. As far as the categorizing of titles, for me, it boils down to two key differentiators. Number one is, are you setting a meeting or are you closing business? Some people do both, but that's a big part of any title. So a meeting setter is going to have something in the title like SDR, BDR, XDR, right? Sales development representative, business development representative. Those are going to be like your volume callers and setting meetings for an account executive, right? So now if you're closing business, likely your title is account executive. Now here's one slight differentiation between that. If you're closing new business, then you're likely an account executive. If you're closing existing business, meaning like renewing your customers that are on multi-year contracts, renewing your customers that are previously customers, then that would be more of an account manager role. So those are two big distinctions. So that number one is like, are you setting the meetings or are you closing the deals? That's a big differentiator. And then number two is like, what's the size of company that you're selling to? Are you selling to companies with 0 to 100 employees, or are you selling to companies with 50,000 employees, right? Those are going to be two very, 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 very different sales motions. And kind of going back to the beginning, where I have background in B2C and B2B, funny enough, I don't see too many differences between it, because at the end of the day, it's either like you're selling to one human or you're selling to multiple humans. So the real difference becomes that B2B is going to be more of a committee decision, right? Is going to be more of a buying committee thing. B2C is typically one person, right? You sell that one person, they're the decision maker, you're good to go. Obviously, I'm generalizing here. It's not always like that, but generally speaking, there's a lot more collaboration. There's a lot more committee purchasing on the B2B side than the B2C side. And a lot of times, generally speaking, the contract sizes in B2B are going to be larger, right? You're selling to companies versus an individual. So that's how I would kind of organize all of those different things. The names and the titles will continue to evolve over time, because once somebody realizes that you're an SDR or a BDR and you're a meeting setter, then maybe they start to shun people with those title, and then maybe it becomes something else. So it's like, I just think of it as like, are you making the meetings, or are you closing the deals? Are you selling to big companies or small companies? Those couple distinctions right there should be able to point you in the right direction.
So this is sort of like a quick tutorial for existing business owners or even startup founders, right? Who need to sell,
Oh yeah.
whatever it is. And in terms of making a strategic decision, they need people to sell, right? My recommendation for people that I coach and I work with, I said, you're the founder. There's no better salesperson than you, because it's your company. Everybody understands what's at stake for you. And from a knowledge perspective, especially if it's a tech product, the owner knows more than anybody else, for sure. So
Yep.
at least start it up and then train other people to do it. What I don't understand is, why break out the appointment setters from from the closers, right? So appointment setting is pretty tough, right? To finally get to the person. And if I made that connection with Alex for whatever that conversation was, now you're going to say, okay, thank you so much. You know, Zev is going to call you. He's our blah, blah, and walk you through the next phase. Doesn't that break a little bit of the relationship building that was created?
It certainly does. And there's an argument that could be made for that. What I would say to your listeners, obviously a lot of startup founders, like you mentioned, to those folks, of course, if they've ever thought about starting a podcast, they should reach out to me. But if they're thinking of starting their own sales team, you don't have to start with these specialized roles. Start out with people who can both make the meetings and close the deals. That would be what would be called a full cycle account executive, right? That's mostly what I do. Like, I set a lot of my own meetings. I do have people that make calls for me as well. To your point, is there a little bit of a break in the relationship? Maybe. What I would say is, most of the times that these cold calls that lead to a meeting, a lot of times it's like 6-7 minute call. Maybe it's an email or two. So people that are really good, I'm sure, could build relationships in that time period. But for the most part, people are getting on the phone with you because they think that you could solve a problem for them. Like, if you went to Farmingdale, you know, if we both went to Farmingdale, but your product isn't going to solve my problem, I'm not going to take a meeting with you, right? Like, it's gotta help me, or it's not worth my time. So I think that's where good salespeople come in, is they're focused on the problem at hand to solve. And then I don't know that the relationship means so much. And of course, it's up to that next person who's getting the meeting passed to them to rebuild that relationship. So I do think that there's a point to that. But here's the biggest thing, is it's time. Because to run a meeting is usually going to take 30 minutes to an hour. Maybe going to take some time to prep. So if you have 3-4 meetings in a day, that could mean you only get an hour to call people, right? So it's like, you constantly need new meetings. So I think there becomes a point where, if you're an account executive, that you get so busy that you can't make any calls for yourself to make meetings anymore. That's where the meeting setter comes in, and they can keep your calendar full so that you're just selling all day rather than making cold calls, sending cold emails, whatever it is that you do for business. That's the ideal salesperson calendar, is you just have meetings from start to finish, right? And you don't have to do any of that prospecting. So that's, I think, what it is. And this was popularized by a book. I don't know when it was released, but over 10 years ago now, called Predictable Revenue, for anybody who's curious. And that's what really kind of sparked this industry of separating the meeting setters from the people who actually close business.
Yeah. And I'm kind of answering my own question as I hear you talk. And I said that the skill set that the account executive has to have when they take what was transferred as, okay, here's a live one, there's an interest there. The skill set is very different than just banging out the calls and the emails and following up and getting somebody in. It's presentation skills, it's knowing how to talk to the decision makers, and finding who is a decision maker, getting everybody in the same room. So again, for larger companies, because the resources are available, it's easy to set up the two different entities. For smaller businesses, whether they're startups or they're existing small businesses, they don't have the luxury to pay a whole bunch of people just to set up meetings, right?
Right.
So let me ask you a question. That is usually done in the universe, in a small world, small business world. That's usually done by outsourcing it to someone else, right? On LinkedIn, there's gazillion these lead forms, right? Or outsourcing it to telemarketing companies, which I've used successfully many times, if the script is right and they're not robots.
Yeah.
That's okay as long as they're trained to filter the person they're speaking with and give you qualified meetings, then you could take over. That's a way to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely, especially for the small business owners that are listening, I would not recommend that you hire a meeting setter and somebody to close business, right? If you're a small startup founder, and to your point, the founder is going to be the best seller of the product to begin with because they're going to have the knowledge of it, right? They're going to have the intimate knowings of the inner workings. Maybe what you do is you hire a salesperson to be your AE, but you have them start by making meetings and then you take the meetings with them, right? So say you're my boss and I call somebody up and I make a meeting with them, then me and you meet with them, right? And I could be there to continue to build the relationship. You could be there to be the product expert. There's no need for a small business founder that has no sales team yet to hire people just to make meetings. You could do a little bit of an apprenticeship program where somebody starts by making the meetings for you to you and go sell. And then when they know the product better, then they could start going off and doing all of that out there on their own. But yeah, it's definitely two different skill sets. There are some
Yeah.
people that are very good at both. There are some people that are way better at one than the other. And that's, kind of the beauty of niches, right? Kind of everyone has their own domain that they know very well, and everything else falls into place.
And and then looking at your trajectory, your career, where you started just making cold calls to set up meetings, and then you said, I want to make some more money, and then you started to move forward. The one thing that sales is afflicted with is a high turnover. So if you are a business owner, and that applies to larger corporations too, even though the numbers are bigger. If you wind up with somebody who's a really good salesperson, whatever you call them, account executive, hold on to them. Don't let them leave, because if they're that good and they're creating this momentum for you, and if they're actually AEs and have the relationships, right? I think the ownership, the business owner, needs to do everything possible to hold on to them. And as I used to say to everybody that I work with, let's not give the good employees a reason to think about leaving. And the sales guys are these are the guys that make things happen. If you don't sell, you're gonna die, right? Right?
For sure. One of the things that isn't even factored into that consideration is how long does it take to find a new one that's good, and how long does it train them to be good? Because typically speaking, the first 0 to 3 months, very
Yeah.
rare, that you're going to find someone that comes in and right away in that time period just picks it up and gets it. You really got to have a salesperson in the seat for 6 to 12 months. It's probably more like 9 to 12 months before they really start getting it, right? Where they can pitch the product in their sleep, where the words just slip out of their mouth without even thinking about it, right? And then you're not just like going through the company scripts, but you're making it your own. Once you have a salesperson that's at that level of proficiency of your product, you hit the nail on the head. You got to do absolutely everything to keep them, because that would be what's called a fully ramped salesperson, right? Fully ramped, meaning like they're producing everything they possibly can. To find a new person to hire them is going to take another 6 to 9 months of time just for them to learn, and they might not be that good, right? They might not even be as good as that previous person. So you hit the nail on the head. When you have a good person and they're fully ramped, they've been in the role for over 6 months, over 9 months, you keep them around. This is where sales is the ultimate equalizer. This is what I love about sales. Like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where you're from, right? What your background is, what your anything is. If you put numbers on the board, you have a job and you do very well. And that's kind of the beauty of sales, is like a lot of jobs. I'll use the teacher as an example. You could be twice as good at teaching as your colleague and you make the same salary as them.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Sales, you're twice as good as your counterpart. You make twice as much money as them. It is unapologetically an equalizer.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what's great about it.
No one who, other than the fact that they're completely insane and should have been shot, ever fired a successful salesperson, right? I mean, so I'm going to tell you a really quick story because I want to ask you another question. So years ago, I was hiring for a direct sales director for East Coast operations. And I remember I was in our Providence, Rhode Island office and I was interviewing 8, 12 people in the day. And literally like 4:45, end of day, I couldn't find anybody. To me, it was just intuitive, right? This guy walks through, his name was Bruce. He walks through the door and he just smiled at me. I'm serious, this is exactly how it happened. And I looked and I said, "You're hired." And he thought I was joking. So he sat down and we start, and he actually, he was that kind of a guy. I mean, I nailed it. He goes into his briefcase and he takes out a checkbook and he said, "How much do I pay you for this?" And I said, "No, no, you're hired." And I hired him. I hired him because when he walked through the door, there was instant aura about the guy that made me feel at ease. And the way he smiled was a natural smile, not a fake smile. I hired him. He tripled the territory in 3 months. But here's my question, Alex. So this was a story that's 25 years old. We don't do that much face-to-face selling anymore. So that you had me at hello moment that I had with
Yeah.
Bruce, we don't. It's really. I'm not going to say it's inhumane. It's not inhumane, but we don't have that opportunity unless you get the meeting in a Zoom call, right? To create this connection with people, right? Tell me, how do you feel about this? I mean, you door-to-door sales, you cold people. A lot of that stuff this is an opportunity that's given to us. I don't know what the percentage is, but it's tough.
Yeah, well, first off, to start, it's a catch-22 because number one, you're doing this because it's increased scale, excuse me. If I was doing life insurance and I was driving to people's houses and I was meeting them there, I can maybe do 4 appointments in a day, right? Maybe 5 if a couple of them happen to be like within a couple minutes of each other. Zoom, I could do 10, 12, right? So it's kind of a catch-22 where it's like you can meet many more people that's not dependent on location, but it is inherently more difficult to build that relationship because even to your point, even over Zoom, it's hard enough to get somebody on a Zoom. Even when you're on a Zoom, you don't necessarily have that chance to like have that moment that you got to have with Bruce. So I think it's twofold. Number one, it's more important than ever for people to have a public facing identity. LinkedIn, a podcast, a newsletter, right? Like you need to be creating familiarity and trust at scale. Number two is got to be really good at copywriting. Copywriting is more important than ever. People can really get very far with their words, and just the way that you write, I think, says a lot about you. So that's what I think it is I think people's copywriting ability is now that like love at first sight equivalent nowadays, right? Is like you see something from someone and they just write it in a voice that you just needed to hear. And on top of that, it's like, do the little things that other people aren't doing. Like when you go for an interview, if you live on the East Coast and you're interviewing for a company on the West Coast, like you better make sure that you're sending out thank yous for the interview, right? Maybe even do a handwritten letter. Maybe send somebody a gift. Really, really great friend of mine who you should actually have on the show for small founders is a guy named Grayson Hogard. He and his wife started a cookie company, and they very quickly got introduced to the idea of strategic gifting through a wealth advisor firm. And now they've done like 40,000 orders of cookies. They've sold something like 400,000 cookies in like 2 or 3 years, right? So you just have to like create these memorable moments for people. So that's what I think the 3 big things are, is like you really have to grab people's attention with your words. You have to be building public recognition, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a newsletter, whether it's a LinkedIn, whatever it may be. And then when you have those moments, you got to make the most of it. You just have to, you got to go 3 for 3.
Yeah, like you said, LinkedIn. First thing you see is the banner, then the profile photo, and then that little short description. If you want to be boring, then be boring. But if you want to be different, then be different. People like different.
Yep.
There were two quotes on a guy you had on your show, Jesse Ouellette. I don't know how to pronounce his name.
Yeah,
Uh, he said two things that I really loved. One was salespeople make it a lot harder for salespeople, and the other one was don't get in their way if they want to buy. Right, right.
for
Buy
sure.
the so that's just like a again. It's to me, it's a simple, basic human relations thing. Like don't get in the way. Uh, if we've always taken the sales training that they used to run, and I've taken a few, always were about, oh, God gave you two ears and one mouth, so just listen and shut up, whatever. Okay, that's not the point anymore. The point is let the buyer first of all focus on the buyer perspective always, and let them tell you what problems they have, and then you can tell them, I think I get it. I have something that you may want to consider, right? Uh, my teams have always had a sign on under their screen or next to the screen that I believed in as a marketing guy that said, "Be the customer." Everybody had that sign. So when you pick up the phone and when you respond to a quote request, don't rush it. Be the customer.
Yeah.
Read between the lines or ask the questions. What is it you're frustrated by? The things that allow us to connect with people. Um, So I have a quote that I made up. One of a few things I didn't steal. I just want to ask you that, which is again comes from experience, right? Back to our to what we talked about turnover in sales, right? My quote, the thing that I always say is, if if sales don't work out, don't blame the sales rep. Blame the person that hired them or is managing them. And I kind of believe in this wholeheartedly that it's not the reps. It's how you onboard them, how you train them, how you handhold them until they're allowed to fly off the nest by themselves. To your culture, to your style, to what your company represents, not just unleash them on the universe. And then they fail, but it's not their fault. Agree? Disagree?
Definitely agree. Because I mean, I've been there, right? Like I mentioned, so I started at Salesforce last June, so June of 2023, and I was one of the people who hit their quota for the year. During that time, when I joined halfway through the year, the startup that I was at prior, I was there from like January to April, right? So really short stint. Pretty much before I even got my feet wet, I had gotten fired, and I really didn't even have a chance to like sink my teeth in, and really get into the product. So the lack of training and the lack of resources and the lack of expertise of what we were doing led to my demise. And then I just go to a better company that had a better training process and more resources, and I'm succeeding. And I'm not like some kind of superhero here. This is probably happening millions and millions and millions of times to other people across everywhere. So I think it's a really good reminder to companies that, like, number one, like, people need time. Like, sure, there are some people, I know, I've seen it before, where they start and like 2-3 months in, you could tell like this is a bad fit. That's a totally different story. I'm talking about people who know what they're doing. It just takes time to really master something and get familiar with something. It's not like a snap your fingers process. You have to invest in people in order to see them grow to their full potential.
Yeah.
That I would definitely agree with is
Yeah.
sales training and management needs to take a lot higher of a priority if you keep bringing in salespeople and they keep failing, right? Your salespeople should be like hitting at a success rate of over 50%, right? If you're hiring people and 1 out of 4 succeeds, 1 out of 3 succeeds, 2 out of 10 succeed, something's not right. Something's not right. It's not the sales rep's fault.
Yeah, and I think when you said, I think that the word is you have to be patient. But if you hire the right person and if you handhold them, you have to be patient. But since you're working with them, you can see. I used to call it incremental improvements, right? If they did something wrong and then you told them and then they improved on it, then
Great point.
at some point they're going to get it. But you have to be patient. And so the other aspect that just came to my mind because I've mentored a bunch of SaaS founders. There's a lot of sales that is taking place without any human interaction, right? Particularly in the SaaS world where it's all about Google ads and Facebook ads and sponsored this, sponsored that, just to see, click, and then try my software for free, whatever, right? A lot of that stuff is done. And from my perspective, the SaaS guys don't have patience because they're under pressure to increase the subscription rates so that one day they can sell it. Pretty much the model, right? But the interactions, in terms of there's no human interactions, but it's all email based, text based, whatever.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the last point I want to bring up to kind of close our sales thing is that to me, the sales is the transaction that now cements our relationship, right? You're convinced, you feel comfortable that my solution is the right thing for you and it adds value and that you can grow from it and do whatever it needs to do. Where people fail, this is my own experience, even as a 13-year business coach, right? I see this all the time. People fail in the after sales service piece, which is equally as important, if not more. You've done all this work to sell whatever, right? You've got the transaction, they're committed, and then you completely drop the ball on the after sale relationships and hand holding. And you shake your head because I mean, it doesn't frustrate you. I've worked so hard, especially in B2B, and I have to say my brand new son-in-law, well, brand new is almost a year. I'm not going to
Congrats.
mention the company. I'm not going to mention the company he works for, but he's in sales. He's a senior AE at a very, very good company. They're under a tremendous amount of pressure with quotas
Yeah.
and stuff, right? Um, it's it it's frustrating when a B2B cycle. I mean, they're working on $1 million deal now that's going to take 6 to 8 months to close,
That's on the short
right?
end too. That could be
Yeah, and
like
that
14 to 16 months in another
correct,
industry. So
correct.
that's
I
even
can't.
short.
I don't want to say what it is, but in that universe, it's probably okay. Maybe a year. It's a bit. It's a nice price tag, right, for a software product. But imagine you close after going over and over and meetings and talking to IT and the decision makers, and then you onboard, and then the installations and the it it's insane why people don't pay enough attention to what happens after the sale, is that?
Yeah, it's a real area of opportunity, and I think it really comes down to the company, right? It's like you have to actively work to both sell and keep your customers in this environment. There are every company in the world now has 100 competitors, right? Especially in the B2B software space. I mean, now with the generative AI and the no coding tools, you could make a competitor for any company in like a couple weeks, right? Something that used to take a couple years. Now, literally people could do in like a couple weeks, a month. So there are so many competitors. If you don't treat your customers right, somebody else will. And even on top of that, they'll do the market research and figure out, hey, this company does a really bad job post sale. So let's track down every single one of their customers, right? And that'll basically be our lead list. People are coming after you. Like, I think that's just the bottom line. Is people are coming after your customers. And so if you don't treat your customers right, somebody else will.
Yeah, I mean, so some of the SaaS guys, when I talk to them and we get into the piece that really hurts them is churn, right? For my audience, it's CHURN. Churn is basically for software as a service companies when subscribers just leave, right? They give you the money and then they leave.
Cancel.
Churn
Yeah.
is the worst thing that can happen to a SaaS company. And one that I spoke with said, we're doing really well, but our churn is 30%. So when you look at the numbers, you're churning as many customers as you brought on board. So you basically, my equivalent is like you're sitting at a
Breaking even.
traffic light, hitting the gas and the brake at the same time. You're making a lot of noise, but you're not going anywhere, right? Um, and that's where the after sale, the hand holding, is so critical. And it's not hard with all the tools we have today, right? It's so easy.
Yeah, and that's why I say care. It's about caring. It's about caring. I think some companies care, and I think some companies don't care. And I've been at companies that don't care, and I'm at a company that cares. Like it's such a huge difference. It's such a huge difference.
Yeah, the CEO of your company, I forgot his name. He's a really impressive guy. Um,
He's fantastic. Mark
yeah,
Benioff. Yeah,
yeah.
great. I would love to meet him one day if somehow this recording falls into his lap. Mark, I'd love to meet you. But yeah, it trickles down. When the CEO doesn't care about the customers, it comes through in the policies that they implement, right? And then the policies that you implement will create the behavior, right? And the behavior will either show that you care or show that you don't care. It's really, really, really important. And again, I think nowadays even more so important than ever, because not only are there so many more competitors out there than there were in the past, but now people can find them easier. Like there's Google, there's social media, right? You could
Mhm.
find a competitive company in 2 seconds. Back in the day, maybe it wasn't as easy. So I think it's a really interesting time in the business world upcoming. This is a great conversation, Zebs. Thanks so much for
So,
having me.
if Mark is listening, zero chance, but who knows? The universe is funny. If Mark is listening, here's a great way you can meet Alex. Run a report every month or once a quarter of all the reps, the AEs that met their quota, and invite them to a call with you and say thank you personally to each one of them. Okay, I don't know how many AEs does Salesforce have?
I I
Who
couldn't
knows?
even know that.
It,
I couldn't even estimate that
it's got to
number. A
be in
lot, a
hundreds, right?
lot,
Yeah.
a lot.
Okay.
I would
So
think in the
does
thousands. Yeah,
okay.
in the
So
thousands. Maybe
so
even the
so
tens of thousands. Honestly.
and that's a lesson to small business and founders that said, listen, there is no greater aphrodisiac than the owner of the company walking over to an employee in the old days, putting their hand on their shoulders and I can't touch anybody, right? And then you say, Alex, I noticed you met the quota last year. I want to thank you so much for your hard work. You're making a difference, Alex, even if you don't realize it. But you are making a difference. Thank you. My name is Mark. Here's my email if you need me for anything, right? Imagine what that would do to you, right? It's amazing.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm very fortunate because I do get that from both my manager and my VP.
That's good.
It doesn't have to be the CEO, right? It doesn't have to be CEO. It doesn't have to be a VP. It could be your teammate. Like it could be a colleague. Like it could be anybody. So I think you bring up a great point. Like I think giving people their flowers is huge, especially in an industry like sales where,
Hmm.
like you mentioned, it could be stressful. There's a lot on the line that little bit of appreciation goes a long way. I could definitely attest to
Yeah.
that.
And salespeople get beat up so much and so often. And when they come across someone who can actually appreciate them,
Yeah.
they can really explode. All right. So last question, Alex. I had a lot more, but we're running late. Um, you spend your entire career in sales. You're now talking to a lot of people there in sales. What would be one piece of advice you would give to anybody who's starting a business or even small business owners? 3, 5, 7 million, they want to grow. Give them a piece of advice of a guy who spent his entire life in sales.
So here's my one biggest thing. People who know me personally will know that I beat the drum on this nonstop in my new coaching gig to help people start podcasts. I am beating the drum on this. It's put yourself out there. And it's not that simple. What I mean by put yourself out there is if you have an idea of how to grow your business, if you think that doing something different, right, could change some of the outcomes that you're experiencing in your business, don't think about it in your head and don't like run the idea by other people. Test it, right? So that's my biggest piece of advice is when you have an idea or you have a hypothesis or you have a point of view of, hey, I think this would really work, instead of thinking about it for a long time, instead of going and asking your friends and asking your colleagues about it, test that theory and then let your customers make those decisions for you, right? That's my biggest piece of advice is when you need to make a big decision about your business, go to your customers, go to your power users and test the idea rather than just having meetings about it internally or rather than spending months thinking on it. Like if you think that this ad would be great, test it, right? Do a small market test. Spend 1/100th of your budget to put that ad out and see if it works, right? So when it comes to an idea or a hypothesis that you want to be proven correct or incorrect, go to your customers, not yourself or your friends, your colleagues. Let your customers be your decision makers. That's my advice.
And I would say, because this is brilliant, I would say the other way works also. If you want ideas to grow your business, if you're looking for differentiators, if you're looking for those problems that are going unsolved and frustrates your customers, but they're not talking about it because they're busy, go and ask them, right? What else can I do for you?
Yep.
Or ask them a simple question, the decision maker. We're doing so well. What else frustrates you on a day-to-day basis? Then maybe I can help you with. If you come from a point of credibility, right? Relationship, they like you, the products work. They open the door for you to ask the question. And it's so easy to grow that way instead of thinking about something no one else thought about and then testing and measuring and all that stuff takes time and takes patience. So, Alex,
Totally agree.
I know this will be awesome. So there's a ton of stuff here for people who either shy away from sales or don't want to talk about it. I think the message we have after meeting you is that, yes, maybe it's a necessary evil in the universe of people that are not familiar with sales. But just like Bruce, the guy that I hired, Bruce, had a business card, and I don't know if it's that email address still alive, but I'm not kidding. It said, "I sell to eat," at, I'm not going to say where. And everyone, I don't care how techy you are with your SaaS company, and I don't care how smart you are, at the end of the day, you need to sell to eat if you want the company to go anywhere. And you need people like Alex, you need people like the new generation of Alexes. And there's a lot of good stuff in here that I will summarize. And if you want to start a podcast, go, and this will be in my show notes. Go check out Alex and learn from somebody who's doing it in a very genuine, down to earth, New Yorker kind of way. Like, right? Talk it out.
Zev, much appreciated. Thanks so much for having me. I hope that folks that are listening in got something out of this. Folks can connect with me on LinkedIn if they don't know of me already. Name spelling is right underneath here. Alex is the first name, last name, B as in boy, RuschI. I'd love to talk to all your listeners that got something from this. Thanks again for having me. I really appreciate it, Zev.